Dom and Johnny in the morning. Okay, so we're going back to kata today because we had a whole bunch of kata questions. And, when we say kata, that's more the generalized martial arts term. In our style, they're usually just referred to as forms. So the first question comes from Freya, which is, why is one pinyin the first form we learn?
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So one pinyin, and I will absolutely butcher the name of its karate form. I think it's like Tekia something. Yeah, it starts. I know it starts with a T. But it's that karate form was known as being one of the most foundational forms for many, if not all, karate styles. And the reason, one of the reasons that I've noticed is that your most important three stances that you learn are in the first three moves of the form.
Yeah.
So you step out and you do a horse stance.
Is it Heian?
No, the Heian Shodan's a little bit different. It's very, very close, but there's a different form that is more one pinyin-esque to the letter.
Nidan?
It's not one of the Heians.
Not one of the Heians. Okay.
Yeah. Most of our forms come from the Heians, most of the pinions.
Yeah.
But that one is very specifically a different form. And I believe it starts with a T, if I'm not mistaken.
And just as a digression, two pinyin was made, like what we teach as two pinyin was Nick Serio.
Correct.
Yeah, he's like the one that actually altered one pinyin a little bit to teach a specific principle.
Yeah.
So whereas what was normally two pinyin we do as four kata.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Heian Nidan. For anyone out there that doesn't know the Japanese terminology, so 1 through 5 is Ichi ni san. Help me. Is it yan? And then go. I think it is. Yeah. Ichi ni san yan go. So when you see. Which is why sometimes you'll hear people refer to themselves as a Nidan or a Sandan. So a Nidan would be a 2nd degree black belt, Sandan 3rd degree. I believe it's Yandan 4th degree. I should know.
Yeah.
And then Godan would be your 5th degree black belt. And a lot of the old Japanese forms would use that terminology as well, which basically just means 2nd step, 3rd step, 4th step, and 5th step. Now the exception is the first one. So there is no Ichidan, which would be first step. We say Shodan, which actually means beginner step. So, which is pretty cool. Just a fun fact for you guys. But as we talk about these kata, that's something to kind of think about. But yes, so Heian Nidan, which was, the second basics form they learned, was then altered to become 4 kata. So it was imbued with so many Kempo principles and changed enough that it just made more sense to help relay the Kempo curriculum, because that's all forms are really there to do. Back in the day, one or a couple forms were the curriculum. That was what you passed down. Yeah. And all the techniques came from those forms. So we're lucky enough where we don't have to live by those standards anymore. But we still do the same thing. We relay the art through the kata. And 4 kata in particular is an incredible form to really help grasp Kempo. Yeah. Which makes sense because it's one of your last Kempo forms before black belt.
That's just funny because 4 kata is always the one that's like everybody's most hated form.
It really is.
Traditionally. Yeah. I like it, but even my higher ranking black belts will complain about it. It's so funny.
I'm getting there. There. I'm starting to appreciate it more.
Yeah.
The 4s, that's the joke, is the 4s. Everyone hates the 4s, but they're probably the most important ones. If you're good at 4 pinyin and 4 kata under black belt, then you're a leg up.
Yeah.
Against everyone else. Yeah.
So as kind of like a clarifying thing, why would we start with 1 pinyin versus our first Kempo form 1 kata? So, instead of just learning 1 through 5 kata, why would we start with 1 pinyin?
1 pinyin, you could find the majority of the principles in our art within that form.
Yeah.
It is such a basic form, but that ends up being the perfect, the perfect map for all of karate and even all of Kempo and Shaolin, if you think about it. So like I said, you get your first 3 basic stances right off the bat: horse stance, cat stance, half moon stance. It's reinforcing your half moon step and teaching you how to punch with your waist. It's teaching you important pivot steps. So your 3 pivots that you use in the majority of your under black belt curriculum are going to be your quarter pivot, your half pivot, and your 3/4 pivot. So all these things are packed into one form, which seems super basic, but that is the foundation of the art. So before you even worry about throwing a kick, or before you worry about doing multiple strikes with one hand or both hands, you're getting that foundation to build off. And then that foundation just gets reinforced with 2-pinion. It's like, hey, we're going to start letting you hit twice with the same hand. However, we still want you to practice these foundational steps because they're so important.
Yeah.
That's at least my opinion.
Yeah. I think just to add to it, what's really interesting is when you teach most students how to half moon step, they tend to step long because they want to commit to the direction of power, like intuitively. So if they're punching forward, their whole body wants to go forward. And in later forms, like 4-pinion, that is absolutely what you do. But 1-pinion, it starts with balance as opposed to starting with commitment. So you start from a more kind of stable place that isn't as forward, but that way you can learn to kind of regulate your power, and it kind of forces you to be aware of where your body's going, because sometimes where we intuit our body to go isn't necessarily the best place for it to go. I mean, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a great example. Like, how many people, if they were to start rolling class 1, instinctively either tighten or try to use speed or strength instead of positioning, leverage, and timing.
Yeah, a lot of times in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we do start rolling from day 1.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so quickly, why you learn so quickly.
Right.
But you are 100% on the mark.
Yeah.
Especially if someone has any sort of wrestling background. But a lot of times, there is such a drive to be successful.
Yeah.
That you do these really quick, jerky motions.
Yeah.
These explosive movements, and it is just, it's so funny working with someone in their first couple classes because they don't get why they can't do what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And then they also have no discernment for getting hurt or hurting others.
Right.
So there's a disconnect there. So, but yeah, it's I think that's one of the benefits of something like 1-pinion is it kind of reinforces that without the danger of without hurting somebody, because you still have that beginner's mindset.
Yeah. So I think establishing balance is probably, and really you can broadly look at the first 3 ranks as that being the goal. A lot of times we talk about white, yellow, and orange as being you're learning how to be a learner, and I think what's behind the curtain of that is learning how to be balanced and learning what balance means, which I think segues into the second question, which is a spicy one.
Ooh.
So this one got asked by Stephanie, like instructor Stephanie, which is, could you remove any form from the style without losing important principles?
Wow, that is a muy caliente question right there. So before anyone freaks out, yes, and I'll tell you why. I'm not saying that it would be as efficient. I think it would be way less efficient.
Yeah.
So if you're the reason why we teach the kata are because they are an efficient way of relaying a principle.
Yeah.
So do I think that you could easily teach that principle with something else, like a technique? Sure. Do I think it will be as effective? No. I think that the reason why the system is built the way it is by Master Valari was to find the most efficient way to relay these principles. And that was his big goal. He wanted as many people as possible to be able to learn the system and become effective at fighting.
Yeah.
So yes, you could, but I don't think it would be as efficient.
Do you have like an example?
Sure. Yeah. So dropping your weight in one kata, that's one just for one basic, form principle.
Yeah.
You can teach that principle in 3 combination. Dropping your weight into that front punch.
Right.
You could teach it in, let's see, I'm trying to think. Even five combinations good when you start doing the. Can I call it chicken mohawk on the podcast?
Yeah, why not?
All right,
that's what we call it.
So the knife hand crane's head in a 5 combination, that chicken mohawk. I mean, you could drop your weight into it like we do in one kata. So those principles are there, but having the form where we are constantly reinforcing that principle in different ways. So pulling in, dropping your weight as you cross. Well, dropping the weight after the cross block as you block down thrust punch, or dropping the weight into the double cross block down, or dropping your weight into the throw. You're constantly using that principle in different ways and with a ton of repetition, and I think that is a way more effective way to learn it. Clarification, that's not the only principle in one kata. But
right.
Just a good example, in my opinion.
Yeah. Valari's is the original Shaolin Kempo karate school of Fred Valari's method. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's debatable.
That is so funny that you use that terminology. I was just thinking about, this is a tangent. I apologize.
That's cool.
We're going to try and reel back after this.
No, go off.
But, so in Kaju Kempo, there's methods. So if you train, you're training under, it's all the same source, but you'll hear things if you train under it, like the Emperado method or the Gaylord method.
Yeah.
And they're all interpretations of the same style. So like I said, this is a tangent. It has nothing to do with what we were talking about. But I think it's kind of cool, like at this point, we've been talking a lot about how depending on who you're training under, it's such a different version of the style.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, like, it's so funny that Kaju Kempo uses that terminology, and we almost could adopt it if we wanted to.
Well, and the reason I say it like that is because even the term, like, Shaolin Kempo, like, sometimes that's attributed to William Chow. So the reason I said Fred Valari is because there are other Shaolin Kempo karate schools that kind of branched off of Fred Valari's original vision, and sometimes they teach different stuff. So, for example, we've had students over the years, for one reason or another, transfer to our school from a different teacher that did not teach them the forms. They only taught the combinations under black belt. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting is one of the things we had to teach them, almost like a yellow belt, is how to learn a form. And in a really abstract way, how to self-diagnose. So I do think if you were to remove all of the forms from the system, you would be missing the principle of self-diagnostics outside of like a partnering environment. So I think partnering is incredibly valuable. I also think that there are times where, especially when you start getting something to work, it can become more difficult to explore other things that take longer to get to work. Mm-hmm. So kind of like a golfer improving their golf swing. Like you have to kind of like have a dip-in skill before you install the new habit that ends up making you more successful than where you started. And I think that a lot of times martial artists from this style that don't learn forms early enough really have a hard time with that skill. I think they can do it. It's just way more difficult. So I'm a huge proponent for practicing forms as part of an art. Now, if you were to remove one form, what would it be?
If one had to go.
Yeah.
If one had to go. I could see removing one pinion in a sense that we could still utilize two pinion as the base.
Right.
Once again, I think then you're starting to pile on a lot of principles at once. I don't think it would be as effective as doing those principles one at a time, but at least you would still get those the basic stance work, the basic pivots, your basic units of motion, learning how to half moon effectively. I wouldn't want to lose any of the other forms because I do think each one of them are so important.
Yeah.
One pinion is so important. It ends up being, like I said, this empty structure that you could input whatever principle you're trying to learn into. So it's why most of the black belts at one point in another have had an instructor say, do one pinion Kempo, or do one pinion Shaolin, or do one pinion like the leopard or like snake, and it becomes this really good template. But yeah, that's, I think if you had to lose one, you have to drop a form.
I am going to argue the opposite, which is two pinion. And that's because there are these stories I've been told of Fred Villari talking about the versatility of one pinion, like you said, where things like you take the template of the form and you replace the handwork with footwork. So instead of a downward block, you do the reverse crescent kick into a front kick. And I think that if you think of it that way, do the whole form with thrust punches, do the whole form with back punches, do the whole form with front punch reverse hammers. Like you can kind of engineer two pinion in it without having it be a formal two pinion. But having the template of one pinion, it can attach a lot of things to it. So I think it's kind of the same answer, which is just you can combine the two pinions into one. So yes, the forms are efficient packages of principles that help you become a more effective martial artist. So the last question for today.
Before we hit that one, are you familiar with John Hackelman? He learned, I want to say it was Karazempo, not Kaji Kembo, but he was, but he learned it from Walter Godin, which was along that chain, and he eliminated all the forms.
Yes,
completely. He didn't want to do it, and he focuses on the fight only, and to that extent, he's trained very effective UFC fighters. So. He's got a couple of champions under his belt. Yeah. It's pretty amazing. And then he teaches the traditional side of it too, but I still think he eliminated all the kata. So from a fight perspective, I don't think they're necessary to be a proficient fighter. But proficient, I'm not talking about, when you work with one of the masters and you can't understand why you're getting pummeled. Right. And so it's a I feel like there is a disconnect, and I feel like the kata brings so much more to the table. And then the other thing is I've always been a huge fan of using the kata as a karate strengthening workout. Right. So I feel like all the movements in the form strengthen your body in the right ways and teach you how to loosen your body in the right ways, so that when you're doing your combinations, they're supplementing that. So I would argue that they're important for more than just the principles too.
Oh yeah. That was originally why, from the posters, why Fred Villari wanted Shaolin as the heart of the system, because if you learn just karate, you can learn effective self-defense, but the way you move with the Shaolin side of things promotes longevity. And I think that's the thing that gets missed a lot in conversations about, whether something's effective from a self-defense perspective or not, is you look at some of these forums and the guys who have been training for a while talk about how basically they've had their whole body replaced. and how badly they've been injured. You've brought up before with MMA, concussions, like a lot of nasty, life-destroying injuries. And, if you want to be a UFC fighter, that is awesome. And also, you're making a lot of sacrifices I think most people wouldn't be happy making. So I do think that what you've been saying about the kata is absolutely true. That for most people who want to be into their 80s and be able to play with their grandkids, you can't destroy your body. And I think that the kata do a tremendous job with the conditioning side of things, which ironically, the same hardcore fighter types will tell you that it often comes down to conditioning. That skill, timing, strategy, those are all important, but if you're out of shape, they don't matter. Conditioning is a huge part, and that's one of the practical ways I think kata plays a role in a martial artist's development.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, the odds that someone's going to attack me on the street, depending on where I live, are still pretty slim. However, no matter what, Father Time is coming after us.
Yes.
And that's probably our biggest enemy is, time.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, to John Hackelman's credit, he has produced a number of champions. So I'm not arguing against his method. It's more being clear on what the outcome is and then being intentioned with your training to produce that outcome. So if you want to produce a UFC champion, you've got to you have to distribute your time in a way that allows you to maximize the result that you're looking for. So I think that depending on your knowledge of the kata, it can help. But again, I also question how many instructors teach kata through that specific lens. I'm not saying they don't. It's just a lot of times, and this isn't speaking of our system, just in general. I see some bunkai through the tiki-takis, and it is ridiculous. It is just, frankly, it's like that just wouldn't be a situation. We are making 4 leaps deep of trying to justify how this fight is playing out in someone's head.
Yeah.
So whereas some of the moves that might be unconventional, there's the twist stance in 5 pinion. I am sure there is an argument for how that is helping you become a better fighter from a very practical perspective. I've shared this story before, but a few weeks ago, my backyard was muddy. I stepped on a rock and it slid out from under me, and I just dropped into that twist stance and kept walking. That, to me, is better self-defense than, learning how to explode someone's heart, because I didn't get injured and get taken away from work, and that it's way more likely that I slip on a rock than I get attacked on the street. It's still good to know how to defend myself if I get attacked on the street, but it's what do you want out of life, and how is that going to inform your training? Yeah. Okay, so last question is, we've talked about the value of forms kind of in the abstract. So this one was a question posed by my mom, and I thought we could just go through it mostly under black belt. Which is, if you were to explain the benefits of each form to a parent, let's say, you have a yellow belt parent, and they're watching their kid learn one pinion, and they ask, what are they actually learning? Because it looks kind of funky, right? Or you have a purple belt parent asking about 2 pinion, or a blue belt parent asking about 1 kata, yada yada. What is the lesson that they're learning for each one?
Depending on the age, especially with their beginning forms, I think you can't go wrong with just saying structure.
Yeah.
Because I think every parent agrees at this point that kids have such a lack of structure, even in school these days, which is so far contrary to 20 years ago, when we were teaching, and they had too much structure in school.
Yep.
Where they needed to come here, and we needed to ease up the structure because.
Right.
But now the school systems have laxed so much that there is so little structure in schools that coming home or coming to karate and getting a little bit more structure injected,
Yep.
I think it really helps. And I don't think the parents know how to reinforce structure, just because it can be difficult. You know,
Yeah.
we're in an age where, you know, when we were young, you know, to have fun, we had to go outside, you know, probably build a jump with our bikes and, you know, come back bloody and bruised, you know?
Watching TV was at a specific time and you couldn't just skip through the commercials.
Yep.
And if you missed an episode, too bad, bucko.
And that was after you finished your homework, which our parents could understand because it was on paper.
Yes.
So, you know, there's just so many differences, and it's so hard to keep up with everything that's going on. It's almost hard. It's so hard to keep track of your children. And I don't even have children. You know, I have my nieces, and it's crazy.
Yeah, I actually had a parent yesterday. I was doing a Black Belt Club conference, and I was just kind of explaining, you know, things like the rank timeline and, you know, the different benefits. And one of the things, first of all, both she and her husband are university professors. Her husband actually was awarded something that had to do with a strengths-based approach to neurodiverse learning.
Whoa.
Yeah, so that is context for the credibility of what I'm about to say, which is she said she tried a bunch of different activities with her 5-year-old, and ours was the first one that made a difference, and that completely different kid, you know, through just a year of training with us. And I think, as you were talking about structure, one of the things, and this is very human, but it just stood out to me, is that I think where things like schools or even parenting, where when people get stuck, it's because they're thinking more structure, less structure, instead of thinking of it as a dial that's dynamic, where it's like we need more structure in this instance, but in this instance we need less structure, where you're more attentive and responsive rather than like trying to find the method that works every time. So it is interesting how the design of things, you know, encourages or discourages certain outcomes, sometimes unintentionally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to that extent, even with the how we treat the structure, you know, it's not boring.
Yes.
You know, like, I mean, one of my favorite things to do is put the kids at front position and try and get them to crack a smile.
Right.
You know, and now they're doing something insanely structured, like near militant, you know, but like the goal is to try and get them to laugh.
Yeah.
And they're dying on the inside, you know, and after they're done, you know, they all crack up. So it is, you're right, it is such a different industry, you know. We have an opportunity to have a lot of fun with it. So while
I to cycle back to this parent's feedback, like the thing she said is that she was just amazed at how productive every class is. So yes, it's fun, but it's not run around the squishy room with no rules. There's a structure, there's an outcome, and we are delivering on our promise. So I think that's what makes it so, I don't know, so special. So one opinion, you know, you mentioned structure is a big part. Balance, you know, we mentioned earlier. And I think the other, like, the lesson I would bring to a parent's attention is it teaches them that they don't get it done in one go. So a common thing I hear from parents, and I'm sure this is multi-generational, is, you know, you get kids, they'll quit if they don't get good at it right away. One opinion, you don't get good at it right away, and even if you do, you don't learn the next piece until the next class, at least the way I do it. So you're instilling this patience and this anticipation and this excitement for what's going to come next. I think that's how you instill a love of learning.
And you know what's super interesting? This is a personal story about my niece.
Yeah.
But she'll learn. So she's learned all three directions of one pinion.
Yep.
We never really know how well she's going to be able to produce it every time she comes into class.
Yep.
It's at varying degrees.
Yeah.
Sometimes she only has one direction, other times she has three. But no matter what, whenever she goes home, the first thing she tells her mom is, I am so good at karate.
Yeah.
And it's, and she loves it, and she feels like she's successful, regardless of whether she completed all three directions or not. She's so pumped, because even if she did one direction right, she's just like, man, I am so good at karate. And it's awesome,
Yeah. No, and it does. It's, there's the short term and the long term, and the long term is you're always working towards a goal you'll never reach.
Mm-hmm.
But the short term is the way you keep up momentum is by feeling successful, like little bits of success. So two pinion, physical principle is waist turning. That's at least how we teach it. So one pinion is get your feet underneath you and then be structured and balanced. Two pinion is you get more power by rotating with it. And then I think if it were a parent, like if I were explaining to them why it's good to do two pinion after one pinion, it would be that they're learning to get more in tune with their body. So it's beyond just memorizing a map, and it's more getting that mind-muscle connection. Prince, you've mentioned dropping their weight. I think physically, it's a lot of coordination. It's amazing, actually, that second direction of one pinion where you cat around for the cross block, how many kids want to step into that punch after the block because they just did it with one and two pinion. So it's not the same thing. You have to pay attention to individual parts, and it's easy to forget little details. And that's really what I think the value of two kata is little details matter. I have a little pot of blue stripes right now, and they're waiting for their red star, but part of it is have you done enough mindful repetitions to make sure that your hands are disciplined, that your leg is retracting correctly? Because if you don't do that now, it's going to make three pinion way worse. It's going to make it so much more difficult because now you kick the can down the road too far. I also think two kata is the first form, just mentally, is the first form where a good amount of it is done at angles, which can be confusing. So just thinking angularly.
Yeah, even one kata with that cross block down on the 45 throws kids through a loop.
Yeah, they sometimes morph into facing a wall instead of the angle. Three pinion?
Three pinion.
Yeah.
That is a form that I'm still working on. Well, there is a lot of advanced footwork concepts in three pinion.
Yeah.
It's the first time you see some of those hidden Chinese leg movements, which is funny because it's a karate form. But obviously, karate through the lens of Fred Villari. So, mainly from that side horse stance, pulling up through into your forward leaning with the spear down. But explaining it to a parent, I'm at a loss for words for this one because I don't think I've ever had to.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to think of how would I explain it to a parent.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's what the student cares about, there's what you care about, and then there's what the parent cares about. So just trying to, when you're thinking through, some parents, of course, my dad would be fascinated by the martial arts part of it. Yeah. But some parents are willing to be we trust the martial arts part. They want to know how it helps their kids, either behavior or abilities to succeed.
Maybe something would be just because there's a lot of small things in there. So teaching kids to pay attention to nuance. Yeah. And mainly with the section with the affectionately named cheerleader pose. Right. Being able to do a front kick, but then land in a side horse stance. Yeah. Lean a little bit, turn your waist with structure, and then turn your waist back to open. It's a lot of really small movements. Yeah. That are all important. So that would probably be the only thing I could think of.
Yeah, it's there's a thoroughness. So, for example, how many parents get upset because they ask their kid to clean their room, and so they throw the blanket on lazily and they kind of kick some dust into a corner and they're like, it's done. And versus having a thorough method of making sure you've done all the little things that matter, because that's the two kata lesson, is little things matter. I think the only thing I'd add is for what the student is learning is that sometimes the right answer is counterintuitive. So there's a lot of weird movements in three pinyin. Yeah. And because they're weird doesn't mean that they're wrong. And I think that lesson becomes super important to set up four pinyin. Because four pinyin, there's a lot of you're in a cat stance, you kick off the front leg into landing strong off that same leg. Like there's a lot of things that are just hard. So statue, I think, was the opposite, which is simple things are sometimes difficult. So I think like a conversational example is apologizing. That's tough. It's simple. That doesn't mean it's easy. Yeah. So yeah. But physical lessons of statue.
Balance.
Yep.
Yeah. Especially for parents. That's the key one, I would say, when they're learning it. Yeah.
Yeah. Balance and stability, especially on one leg, because that's the thing that's going to help them not fall. So there's learning what balance is in one pinyin, but then there's strengthening balance and just making sure that you're not as movable.
Yeah. Speaking of the beating father time, especially for adults.
Yep.
I think just practicing statue of the crane, the injection of kata into the system. Yeah. That form alone, I think, will keep you aging a lot more gracefully, since one of the number one causes of severe injury in elderly is falling.
Oh, excuse me.
I couldn't tell.
Yeah, no,
if you were just like disgusted with what I said.
Oh no.
I think this part's getting cut, but if not, gesundheit.
It's interesting you bring that up. There have been times throughout, my decade teaching where a student who had reached a high rank will come back, maybe even for just one class. They just want to drop in because they're in the area and they want to have some fun. Statue is the one we usually work on for that reason, because especially if someone hasn't been keeping up physically with a lot of the strengthening stuff, when you have both feet under you, you can kind of move through it. But when you've got that one leg up, man, does it reveal everything. So, and sometimes, I think from a strengthening standpoint, I absolutely agree. Statue is there is so much value in that form. For opinion.
Survival. Yeah. I think for opinion is the first form that you learn that really, tests your dedication to the martial arts.
Yeah.
Because it is a hard form.
Yeah.
It is difficult.
I think it's the most difficult form to remember and perform under black belt.
Yeah.
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 I mean, there's plenty of four kata hate, but it's usually because I have been told that four kata feels redundant. I disagree. But that is a consensus among some of our black belts. I also think four pinyin combines the lessons of three pinyin and statue, which is sometimes the simple thing is hard, sometimes the right answer is counterintuitive, sometimes that right answer that's counterintuitive is also hard. So there's just so many sequences where it kind of like you explained with the cheerleader part, I'm thinking of where you circle the guard, break, grab, front kick, like that. There's so many boxes to check there, and all of them matter. So, it's just difficult.
That very end piece after your last push.
Yeah.
Where you break the grip, grab, and then knee and kick.
Yep.
And lately I've been racking my brain about it, because even at my rank, sometimes we go through the motions, and we forget to think about, what makes sense. And recently I was realizing that I was throwing my hips forward for that front knee. Yeah. And then my leg was just extending.
Right.
And it felt so it didn't feel powerful. It didn't feel right.
Yeah.
And then I had to go back and pretty much think about what I was doing. This is more on the martial side.
Yeah.
But so this is some of the stuff that I think of. So probably not something I would tell a parent.
Right.
But if I was, if I had someone by the head.
Yeah.
And I was bringing them into my knee.
Yeah.
The knee's not going forwards. The knee's is going upward.
Yeah.
And if the knee goes upward, now my hips are chambered to be able to push forward for that kick to kick them away.
Yep.
So difficult form.
Yeah.
Even for black belt and beyond, we're still thinking about ways to make it, to make it make sense for us.
Yeah, well, and actually on that note, I remember the light bulb going off that four pinion is the first really violent form. So like all of them are violent, but like four pinion has these brutal finishing moves. Like a front punch can be a finishing move, but it also doesn't have to be. Whereas, an elbow to the temple, that's gonna do some damage. So yeah, and I'm trying to think through. There are some parts of other forms that have kind of similar parts, but four pinion is the first one that's just brutal forward to the end. So five pinion.
I like this one, even though I think it's not quite as important when you first learn it, but I still hear it referred to as driving, which I think is really cool because that is like your first step into moving from the waist.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like you said with one pinion, keeping your hips underneath you.
Yeah.
I think that is really accented in five pinion, and almost teaches you how to walk. How to just be with your hips underneath you constantly, especially when you're moving forward. And if you could do five pinion well, I think it really helps you for future forms like swift tigers and stuff.
Oh yeah. Physically, it moves through all of the basic stances. That's just that's a neat little trivia fact. In it, you see horse, half moon, cat. Depending on how you practice it, bow, forward leaning, twist, and dragon. So, yeah.
Wow. Never noticed
and you
that.
also get close twist stance and far twist stance, where it's like more upright and more dropping. I think from the mental side, there's a perseverance aspect, especially through the back half. One of the things I was told is that your goal, once you hit that long twist stance, is to try to stay level through all of the rest of the stances in the form, and that cooks your legs. So there's kind of like a toughening element to it. Four pinion, I think, is toughening psychically, where like you're trying to remember everything and it's tough to do, and you have to pay attention to little things. Five pinion, I don't think has the same detail complexity, but in terms of what you're asking your body to do, I think it's like more physically demanding.
Forging the vessel.
Yes, yeah. So last three, the katas. So physically with three kata,
it's definitely, I would say, one of the more physically intense forms.
Yeah.
So when doing three kata, you're going to be out of breath. It's hard not to be. But it's also it's learning to use that movement continuously. So your blocks are going right into your strikes, almost like the sides. I don't know what they're called, but whatever links the wheels on a train.
The couplings.
Yeah. So the cut block comes up and it just continues to rotate, bomb, and hit, and at the same time the other hand's doing this. So for parents, I would say a ridiculous amount of whole brain synchronization.
Yep.
Because both halves of your brain are firing like crazy through this form, and then also just the physical fitness aspect, because it is a physically demanding form. Doing that sweep down to jumping and doing a scissor kick and landing, and then you have your first triple kick, front kick, back kick, side kick. Yeah. There is just a lot of physically demanding parts, especially on your legs in that form. So that would be my for parents. I'd say whole brain synchronization and fitness.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is 360-degree awareness. Because the metaphor is that you're on top of a hill and you're defending it in all directions. And how many parents want their kids to be aware of their surroundings, you know? Okay, so for kata, the one that everyone hates.
I'll let you start. I want to know because what I would tell a parent, no idea.
So for kata is the beginning of learning how to move from your spine first. There's a lot of movements where you kind of coil and uncoil. Interestingly, you also almost never come back to front elbow position. Yeah, you're like hitting from where your hands are. The other forms before it, you're usually resetting into something comfortable, whereas for kata is the first one where you're kind of hitting naturally. The way it's been described to me is that for kata is the lower half of the dragon, 5 kata is the upper half of the dragon, and 3 kata is kind of like one pinyin in that it's the template that you go back to. So when you practice the lower part of the dragon for 4 kata, you go back to 3 kata and you see if you can integrate the principles into an older form. Part of it, I think, the mental lesson is that new stuff will inform old stuff. So your old stuff shouldn't look the same as when you first learned it.
Since we have a lot of student listeners, write that down.
Yeah.
That is one of the hardest things to do is go back. And I think we do it really well. Just because we have those periods in between forms, once you get to green belt, where you have to do a full review. And I think a lot of schools don't do that. Not bashing other schools, but I just think I think there is a massive benefit in after learning 3 pinyin, doing a full forms review and integrating those new principles, and then after 4 pinyin, doing a full forms review, integrating those principles.
Right. It was interesting. So we used to do a review, but it was kind of up in the air. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like you knew you were supposed to, but it was up to the student to track, and most of the time they'd forget what form they were on, so you'd kind of figure out when that would make sense. And, my sister's famous example is she was stuck on one pinyin for 6 months because she'd always have a different instructor, and no one was really paying attention to how long she'd been on that form. So then we went through a period where there wasn't really a review. It was just like you finish 3 pinyin, and then you kind of do like a day or 2 of review, and then you move into statue almost immediately. And I, just watching the trends, there was a decline in quality without review. So what we did is, we asked Ken if you had to have a checklist of they should be doing these principles in 1 pinyin after after 3 pinyin, so that way we know that everyone is hitting like the same kind of core principles while also leaving room for the fact that individual students may have individual challenges. What would that look like? And it takes usually about, I would say, like 3 to 6 months of just review. Mm-hmm. We have not only seen a huge jump in quality, we've seen a huge jump in retention, because they feel like they earn everything. Yeah. But also there's a clear pathway of where they're at. They're not just wondering, when am I going to move on? There are very clear parameters. You'll move on when you can pivot on the ball of your foot. Click, see the picture where you're not pivoting on the ball of your foot. That means you're not ready to move on. It's pretty clear, and it's impersonal. So it's a lot easier for them to feel like they're working towards something and they're being productive. Mm-hmm. So I'm a huge fan of that, and it's something I recommend for any school in our style. So the last one is 5 kata.
I love 5 kata. I think even though I know the theory behind it is supposed to be the hands of the dragon.
Yep.
I always thought of it like like the sequel, like the two kata sequel.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah.
So you have these, movements with one hand.
Mm-hmm.
Being driven by the waist. But then you're adding in, some new aspects. So in two kata, you're thinking palm down, crane's head up. But now you're thinking opening, with the crane's wing, and then you're thinking a circling strike into a linear strike, circling strike into a linear strike. So it's just that opening part. It feels like the two kata sequel.
Yep.
But just the way you move your body's interesting, because there is almost you start to get the shift from the left leg to the right leg, and it's something you don't see in a lot of the any of the under black belt forms really until you start adding principles into them.
Three pinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you shift back. Yeah.
But there ends up being like almost a little bit of a reach. And depending on what school you go to, because I know in a lot of the Massachusetts schools for the crane's wings, they actually fade a little bit to the back leg and then fade forward to the right leg as they do those crane wings. Yeah, so there ends up being this shift between the legs back and forth, which for the most part under black belt we're 50-50 unless we're in a cat stance. Or a forward-leaning stance.
Yeah.
But in half moons and horse stances, we're traditionally 50-50 under black belt.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's kind of cool to start to see that side-to-side movement, which really helps with forms like Hansuki in the long run.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to take the cop-out answer, which is it just integrates the things you learned before it. Yeah, because you're seeing the coiling motion of four kata with a lot of the hand work and the upper body work of two kata. You've got the flying side kick, which is just kind of cool. But it's also teaching that, when you leave the ground, you do get power. You're also committing. So you can't change direction.
Nope.
There's some cool multi-directional stuff. Like, three kata does a little bit of it. You mentioned the triple kick in three kata. I'm specifically thinking about the trap and the rising kick at the end into the spear. There's just all sorts of... It kind of is a nice little overview of what you've learned so far, so that, when you test for first degree and you start learning six kata, you're on the other side of that threshold.
Dom and Johnny in the morning.